Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you all for joining us. I'm going to go ahead and hit this stop share button, and I'm going to pin Ian here to the top. So he should be the main person you get to see. And thank you all so much for hanging out with us. This is Ian McRae. Ian is a friend of mine that I met, when he was here visiting as a visiting professor over doing some work both on the ag campus as well as with landscape architecture. And if you all know Maria Martinez with Facility Services, Ian was sort of making the rounds, figuring out where to get data. And Maria said, oh, by the way, you got to go talk to Mike. And I've been having a lot of fun working with him ever since then. And he's done some awesome work working with undergrads, giving them some very, very practical experience. One of our former students went to Tenjic and presented a bunch of the work that she had done in conjunction with Ian. We'll talk a little bit more about this EPA Rainworks thing here in a little bit. So he's just doing a lot of really awesome stuff. And Ian is joining us from the West Coast today. So Ian, where are you physically right now?
I am in the city of Richmond in San Francisco Bay Area. It's in the East Bay, and I grew up maybe about an hour away from here, but the Bay Area has become my newly adopted home because I went here for undergrad and grad at Berkeley, so it's just around the corner. And it's close enough but far enough away from family. It's kind of a sweet spot.
Gotcha. All right, so Ian, you've got this kind of cool background in both sort of the plant science world of things, and then also in sort of the landscape architecture world, because you've got your master's degree there. And what I've been telling people about you and sort of the cool way that I think you combine a couple of different disciplines is you've got the landscape architecture background, you're interested in green infrastructure, and then you're really interested in sort of how humans interact in that space and how we use that green infrastructure to mitigate the impacts of climate change. So tell us a little bit about what you do as an urban design consultant, and then give us a little overview on the projects that you're working on.
Yeah, I feel really fortunate to have found myself at this company, Sherwood Design Engineers, because unlike a lot of companies, they have a budget allocated specifically to innovate within the urban design realm and to really explore pertinent topics as it relates to climate adaptation, sea level rise, river systems and urban flooding, and how that interacts with the fabric of the landscape with respect to economy and population demographics. So I operate as an innovation designer, and I come from more of a technical background. It is this really nice nexus between science and design, and what we are charged with is twofold. One is to explore a variety of strategies and to evaluate them. What we are selected for is really to provide 10 options that are outside of the box, that go beyond the convention of like infiltrating water into the soils or trying to cool the building envelope using vertical vegetation. And we give them a variety of different scenarios that we've put forth and evaluated, and we show them what it would take to get there, what the limitations are, and what our recommendations are. And then we give it to the client and their engineers and architects, and then they'll digest it and make the next best decision. And as they move through the different design phases, we kind of ride along with them, diving into greater detail with respect to the project, really trying to achieve some of those goals that are very difficult and sometimes almost like mystic. When we think of, what is net zero water? You capture all the water on site and none of it leaves. What is net zero energy? You generate all of the water or all of the electricity on site, and you also reduce your consumption needs so they match up. And so there's a lot of different ways to go about it, but the big challenge stems from every project is different, the context is different, so there's no one size fits all strategy, and it takes really being familiar with the breadth of options to have the fun of exploring and see what opportunities there are in stitching together what might be disparate ideas, but are actually really rich with innovation potential.
So one of the things I get some feedback on from my undergrads is it's really important for them as they transition from students to being professionals like you. They need opportunities to apply what they've learned, because one of the most valuable things we can help them build is confidence. That way they feel good about the decisions that they're making. If you're talking about every project is different, every project is going to be unique, how did you go through and build that confidence to feel good when you go and you talk to these clients with these recommendations?
It's terrifying. It's, we're trying to put ourselves at the forefront of a conversation that a lot of people are involved in, but for the most part, it's a slogan for companies and very few follow through or fully cook an idea for it to be useful in implementation. So the trick is say what you know and admit what you don't know, and be working with those that are the knowledge, because you can't know everything. So you have to surround yourself with the right people and just make sure that you present what you've put your effort into, and that it represents you as best as possible, because yeah, you can only bullshit for so long. So we have to make sure we get it right. This is a pretty interesting time we find ourselves in, because we're seeing the realities of climate change manifest in different forms, and we also are now really adept in technology and engineering, so we can start solving some of these challenges tomorrow. But how do we do it in an efficient fashion? How do we remove like the trial and error? So we're only as good as the data we use, and some of that data starts with us, and so we have to be really careful about what we feed forward, because it can snowball for good or for bad. An example is we were using the word bionic. We were starting to think about, how do you program a river system with a series of weirs and computers that monitor weather forecasts, so you can kind of almost like what the Tennessee Valley Authority did with the dams, but in a much smaller scale, and it's all about controlling urban flooding and trying to encourage ecology. But really it was about this idea of a bionic river, and what we found is that bionic became this buzzword that people like latched onto, and it was a huge detraction from what we were actually trying to convey as an idea. So branding is powerful, but it also can kind of undermine the goal. So it's kind of tricky in how you package these ideas and what you want to really be the resonating fact that they take away.
Who are some of the clients that you all work with? Or the types of clients, maybe not individual names, but the types of clients?
It's pretty broad. It can be from technology campuses to schools to homes. We're designing. So in Saudi Arabia, there is, I don't know if in Saudi Arabia, but there's Dubai and there's Masdar. And they are both very cutting edge cities. Some have been more successful than others. Dubai was successful because they had an originating population, and Masdar was aspirational, but there was no existing population there. The reason I bring it up is we're now working on projects that are building very aspirational cities from scratch in the Middle East, trying to figure out how do we integrate all of these different green aspirations or sustainable aspirations early on in the design conversation, so that it is like integral to the fabric of the city. And so our clients really do range from a single building and a single home to an entire city. And actually, luckily, I'm not involved in that project, and that's a huge blessing, because those people sleep. It's like endless deadlines. Some of them are totally enamored with the idea of being involved in that project, and that kind of intoxicates them and lets them really just dig deep. But I'm on the outside looking in, and it's pretty good on the outside. I like the grass over here.
Yeah. Man, think about that concept of systems, because an individual building or an individual tributary that you're talking about is a system, because there's all these different parts and pieces that are working together. But then if you start talking about multiple buildings on a campus or a whole city, it's systems within systems within systems. And yeah, I'm glad I would be on the outside of that too.
Yeah, it's interesting because I spent a lot of time in academia trying to pursue unique methods, and academia is my way of validating those skill sets through publication and collaboration. And so in academia, I spent a lot of time kind of defending the ideas put forth, because it is kind of derived from your own process. So it's really interesting to be on the other side in the engineering firm, where you don't have to defend your ideas as much, and you actually shouldn't tell them everything, because that's IP. You really just need to give them the answers, because that's what they hired you for. So that's one of the bigger adjustments that I've had to get used to between those two realms.
So you've got a pretty cool background in sort of the technical science side of things. We're going to get to that in a minute. But when a lot of us think about sort of landscape architecture, urban design, a lot of us are thinking about these sketches or posters or layouts that are done, and these cities are all drawn in glass, and there's these like half faded out people like walking down the street and all that sort of stuff. But you're talking really much more about a data intrinsic side of what you do. So what kind of data are you working with that's less the aesthetic side and almost, I'm going to say, hard science side of what you do?
Yeah. So this is the opportunity within landscape architecture, and it's also the thing that's kind of like taking me away from landscape architecture. And I'll explain in that I pursued landscape architecture because it was this interface between science and design, but traditionally it's actually very design oriented, and the metrics that drive decision making are maybe antiquated or based on assumption. You plant a tree, you get shade, you've lowered temperatures, but to like what extent do you have to plant trees to achieve a certain amount of reduction across the site? So I realized within the field of landscape architecture, which really encompasses everything but the buildings, landscape architecture transcends environmental planning, urban planning, city planning. It's really expansive, and that's kind of what seduced me to it. But it isn't rigorous with metrics. So then I got into CFD modeling, GIS analysis, looking at ways that we can actually simulate urban environments to evaluate how different proposals will perform in today's climate and in future climates. So this way, you can really say, okay, this is what you need to implement if we're trying to mitigate an increase of temperature 20 years from now. Like, this is what your upfront cost will be. This is the return on investment. And those are the metrics that often will drive the decision making. And so to answer your question, the kind of data that I work with is kind of operates in two realms. One is meteorological. It is looking at, and I'm not a meteorologist, but I work with those that are. And so through them, I've been able to like learn and to acquire information. And so it's the weather of today, it's the weather of 20 years from now, and how you input those parameters into a model and the different things within that model that are necessary so that it doesn't crash. It's amazing how finicky CFDs can be. And then the
Tell us
other,
what a CFD is.
computer fluid dynamics. So
Okay.
it's basically a computer simulated like fluvial structure. So it could be wind, it could be water. So with respect to meteorology, it's wind. And this is really significant because wind is a large driver of cooling and heating if we're looking at energy reduction in buildings or human comfort. And so the texture, the friction of an urban environment through the composition of high-rise buildings, vegetation, different amenities really changes how wind moves through a site. And that can be quite confounding to simulate, but if you identify platforms out there that let you do it, it can be really quite powerful because everyone wants this information, but most people don't know how to get it. And so there's that. And then another is HECRAS, which is put out by the Army Corps of Engineers, and that has a lot of data as it relates to hydrology and just riverine dynamics. And with that, I would say that I'm more of someone who looks at the results and less of someone who actually knows how to run the software. But that's the beauty of working at a company where we have different departments that have those capacities.
Yeah, for those of you that don't know, Ian says HECRAS. It's from USGS. It's I think it's like a free add-on that you can get for ArcGIS, and it helps you with is it 1D and 2D flow modeling?
Yeah, so it's a standalone platform that the
Oh, that's
Army
right.
Corps put together.
HECGeoRAS is the ArcGIS part.
And then there's a more awesome version called GeoHecRAS that you have to pay for, but it's basically like a skin for what Army Corps had put together, because Army Corps is a very kind of competent and powerful tool, but the interface is like super archaic. So then this other company comes in, you pay like $1,000, they put a beautiful skin on top of it, and you can start importing data from Rhino and all of these really complex 3D modeling softwares, and it integrates it and it lets you build these really awesome models. So we're finding these opportunities, which is really quite cool because it speeds up the workflow, and it also lets people feel like they can pick it up and start using it more quickly. Versus there's other platforms that you just have to learn from scratch, and you don't even want to start.
Well, and it seems too that for years and years, as a society, we talk about the benefits of green infrastructure and that sort of thing, but we haven't always necessarily done a great job of convincing others of the value of it. And
Hmm.
it seems like if you're using tools like GIS data or LiDAR data, GeoRAS, whatever it is, that you're going to put some numbers with that too. And maybe that it makes it, does that make it easier for you to sell this to clients about why these things are valuable?
So I am that has been the aspiration. I think when it comes to trying to convince people, everyone can agree that we want to reduce temperatures and that we want to clean the air and clean the water. Um, but it's very challenging to get people to actually open their wallets to the idea. And so in order to do that with respect to a client and developers and larger individuals, you have to appeal to their economics in order to make those good, the greater good happen. So I've only recently gotten to a point where I'm able to bridge that gap between having metrics and tying it to economic implications. But I think that it is kind of the backbone of how this will move forward, in at least in our current business environment, because there's not enough government subsidy or investment to really carry it. So it has to be on the private stakeholders on an individual basis at the moment to implement it. And we're kind of dealing with this right now with the project, the one that I was telling you about before people started joining us. But they want to go district. They want to connect recycled water through all the buildings. They want to take excess nuisance groundwater that's flooding their basements, pump it into riparian tributaries that run the length of the street to the nearby river, and augment the flows in the river so that the steelhead salmon can start swimming back up during migration. But there's so much existing policy and regulation from the public realm that makes it incredibly challenging to do this tomorrow. So instead of just saying it's not possible, what we're doing is we're starting to think about this in like a patch theory. We're going to think about these different satellites throughout the city that can be stitched together through different types of infrastructure, something even as simple as tree canopy in the streetscape. But you set up the infrastructure and the architecture to be able to expand in the future so that you're building the city in phases. And phase one is building those satellites, but they can almost be these points of emanation in which the infrastructure starts tying to their neighbors, and you can decentralize different utilities, be it water, wastewater treatment, energy generation, things along those lines. So
Sounds like every day you have awesome opportunities to do great work, but also be incredibly frustrated.
it's this is actually the fun part. So I come from, like, my earliest memories is art and drawing and sketching, and I went into science because I didn't want to be broke. Um, and then I found out that I love studying science more than practicing it with respect to like molecular genetics and wet lab. So I used to do algae biofuel research, trying to do scale ups of different algal strains to figure out if it was feasible for commercial applications. And then I also did, I love entomology. I love to learn the stories of insects, but to practice entomology, you have to you study them through killing them. And that didn't make sense to me. If you love it, you just like harvest and kill and count bugs. And often you end up in agriculture. And that's not a diss to the field at all. I really enjoyed it, but it wasn't how I wanted to practice. And so then it was kind of a way to bridge science and design together. And yeah, I think I got off topic there, but hopefully that answered the question.
No, that's fine. That's fine. So I want to ask you one more, and then we're going to pause and see if any of our attendees have some questions, and then we'll get back into it. So we've heard a lot about the different types of things that you work on, the different types of projects, different types of clients. So for students that are thinking this might be an interesting career path for them, tell us a little bit about your path. And I know you've got sort of a circuitous route to get where you are, but what do students need to be looking into if this is something they're interested in?
It is a tricky thing. We're now finally seeing a job market that is available to these specific interests. There weren't a lot of opportunities 5 or 10 years ago to be a sustainable energy and environment consultant, or to do climate adaptation policy development. And now they're more abundant. The pathways there are also becoming more available. I know at UT there's a sustainability undergrad major, and that wasn't an option when I was an undergrad. And so I think right now to get into this field, which, so first and foremost, like it is starting to be practiced more and more in every facet of the industry. Architects are using this in their conversations every day, landscape architects, civil engineers, environmental engineers. So inevitably, if you want to get involved in this, it's probably going to be part of your work life very soon. And I think what's most important is like, if you want to have a purpose to the work you do so you can really get behind it, this is a great kind of theme and topic to get behind. It's very easy to feel like you're taking up the shield and you're fighting for something. So what I really suggest is whatever you like actually doing, if it's drawing, if it's math, if it's reading, really recognize that and find a way to integrate that. And then once you know that the thing that you're practicing is something that really enriches your life, you can start steering it in the direction of sustainability or climate adaptation or green infrastructure. So for me, I love drawing. I love graphics. I love taking complex information and making it visually digestible. And I found a way to be able to do that in the work I do every day. I don't paint anymore, and I don't sketch stupid stuff anymore as much as I used to, and I miss it. But the reason that, and actually I remember now why I was, what my ramble was earlier. The reason that I like this field and the reason that I like the rules and the challenges is that it's really hard to create something from scratch. If you look at a blank canvas, where do you begin? So the challenges of policy, the limitations of different stakeholder interests, topographical features, the seasonality of things, those are actually rule sets that you get to design within. And I think that's a really fun challenge because now you have to work within a system of constraints, and that forces a greater creativity than a blank piece of paper. Because with the blank piece of paper, if you don't make any rules, you'll draw the same thing again and again. You know, I drew the Stussy symbol as a kid all the time on every piece of paper everywhere. Like, I don't even, you know, you just kind of default to these things. I default to drawing cubes. I default to drawing circles. But when you actually apply a rule set, totally different outcome. And that's the beautiful thing about working in urban design and this general industry, is because there's so many different challenges and each one is different. And that's actually a cool opportunity. Though sometimes I'm really frustrated. The grand scheme, though, it's awesome.
Well, I think let's use that to segue into the work you've done on college campuses with the EPA Rainworks Challenge. But before I do that, I think everybody should have the ability to unmute themselves if you want to. So has anybody got any questions for Ian before we sort of change gears here a little bit?
I have a question.
Sure.
You can hear me?
Yes.
Your firm, it's in California. Do you guys do like various climates and different, well, you said you had a project in the Middle East. Is that pretty common, or are you like more specifically to where you actually are in California?
That's a good question. So the company as a whole has offices around the US. There's one in Atlanta, New York. I think there was one in Houston, Los Angeles. So I would say most often I have projects that are based around the Bay Area and in California, but I'm working on a large quarry park in Atlanta. We're doing projects in Europe and Asia, and the company is growing and the portfolio is growing. And so with that, the diversity of projects and so, you know, I wish I could go to them all. I visit most through Google Earth Pro, which isn't half bad, but yeah. And so, yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, is that challenging, having to kind of like hop around from different climates and different contexts and geographies?
So interestingly, so I work as an innovation designer for a group within the company called Polaris, and we are the urban design and urban performance metrics cohort. So when it comes to trying to navigate the different metrics of a site, when we do a site analysis, it's actually our job. We are largely the ones the company comes to do comprehensive GIS analysis and climate research to put together all of those factors for others to sit down and figure out, like, how do we use this? And we can make initial recommendations. If we have an observation that's pretty profound, it's valued to speak up. But I would say that it's kind of a discovery process, and it's actually those differences of each project and climate and topography that is like the fun part of discovering, like, oh, this is what sets it apart, or this is a liquefaction zone. It's like very seismically unsafe, but even in that, there's some cool infrastructure we can use to harness that or counteract it. Yeah.
Hey, thanks, Josie. Anybody else got a follow-up for Ian? I don't see a hand up. I don't see anybody's mic going off. So let's talk a little bit, Ian, about this, the EPA Campus Rainworks Challenge. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to bring up my PowerPoint here for just a second. And give me just 1 second here. And I'm going to go to share screen. And Ian, this is going to be the...
that's the Berkeley one.
This is a Berkeley one. I don't have a copy of the UT one, but can you? Well, you probably did send me one at some point.
Yeah, that was 2 years ago. It's okay.
Yeah. So walk us through what this is, and if maybe talk a little bit about if students are interested in following this career path, how this is a way to sort of test the waters on that.
Yeah, so the EPA Rainworks competition, I think, is going into its 8th or 9th year. It's put on by the US EPA, and it is a competition on an annual basis where students come together to design green infrastructure systems and solutions to address stormwater and runoff and water quality. It can be just a primary school, a high school. Often it's a college campus. That's the primary group that they're encouraging to participate. And there are 2 different categories. One is a small demonstration scale that is probably less than 10 acres. And then the other is a master plan scale where you're looking at the school as a whole or the campus and ideally the surrounding context, because context is essential. And so different schools go about it in different ways, but what the EPA is effectively looking for is a very holistic approach that, you know, you're taking in, of course, the developed landscape to anticipate how water will move across site, but they're also very interested in how does this relate to education? How do we highlight the significance of these different types of infrastructure? How do we engage with the surrounding community? Often there's every university has a different dynamic with the city. Often they're on the same side, sometimes they're not. And so how do you figure out how to integrate the infrastructure between those 2 different entities to really benefit stormwater and its network at a broader regional level? The EPA is easily seduced. Man, that's the word of the day. I've been using seduced a lot. I'm really tired. I'm working crazy hours. So the EPA just loves metrics. If you can give them numbers, with respect to amount of water captured, the amount of irrigation that is being supplemented from non-potable sources, economic savings as a function of changing management strategies. The EPA eats all of that up, and then, which is also just a great thing from the standpoint of the students to be able to take part in and calculate those numbers, because that's kind of making some of these like concepts of sustainability more tangible. You know, sustainability is this umbrella idea that encompasses so many different other concepts. You know, adaptation, resilience, recycling, conservation, but how do we actually apply that? And so by going through this competition and generating these metrics and calculating what a specific strategy will do, you know, if it's implemented in a certain volume, what that actually means, and so how do we carry it forward? And then lastly, a really strong portion of the submission is the graphic quality, taking again all of this really rich and dense information and making it really legible to a general audience. And that's the hard part. And I think that is really something that transcends all skills and all professions, is like, how do we take an idea and make it understandable to anybody in the room? And so that's probably one of the greatest skill sets developed during the course of this exercise, is again, packaging it up into something very compact and sending it to someone who's never seen it before and having them clearly understand what it is that you're trying to convey. And so If you want to work with people in different departments across the campus, this is a great opportunity for that. Often I see it's the city planners and the landscape architects and the engineers that pursue this, but there can be finance, there can be medicine for public health, there can be, I think I've seen a couple physicists come in and just have a good time coming up with some crazy stuff. So it's really open to everyone. And the cool thing about competitions is that it really sets you apart on your resume. It's a great way to network, and it shows a capacity to work with others in a large team dynamic. So.
Did you say how long this usually takes you when you do this with students from start to finish?
So I think you can sign up in September and it's due by December. And so it's a 3.5-month exercise, which can go really quickly, and you end up spending like 80% of the time coming up with ideas, and then you spend the last 10% of the time actually making the document. Regardless of how much you try to prep in advance, it's always just the scramble at the end, because it's a video, a design board, and a full report.
And we've got a lot of folks on the call today who are not GIS folks, and we've been really GIS heavy with the last couple of guests we've had. So can you talk us through a little bit about, do you have to be a technical person like a GIS person to contribute to this, or are there ways that other folks who that's not their interest can contribute?
I think that they can absolutely contribute. So the way that I've participated and structured this is I use it as a class, and the first third is just learning a new language and learning about all these new toolkits that are available so that you can apply it. And so I think that this is a great exercise for anybody, because it forces you to be creative with what is made available. And I have people on my team where we go through these thought exercises of trying to come up with cool ideas, and it's still a struggle even for those proficient in the field to be iterative and to think out of the box and just to put ideas out there. So this is a great forum for practicing that, and really just trying to practice being creative, it comes with practice.
So of the folks that you worked with here at UTK's campus, are there faculty or staff on campus that you think our undergrads, if they have an interest in this, should reach out to?
I remember John Hathaway was pretty excited about this, and he's
civil engineering,
water. Trying to think else. Joanne Logan has done it in the past, but I think she's retiring soon, isn't she?
Yes.
I know Brad Collette has submitted in the past with students, and this really fits well with the department that he works with. And he was my old colleague in the Department of Sustainable Landscape Design. And I'm trying to think who else.
Maybe Andrea Ludwig?
Yeah, Andrea Ludwig, for sure. And I think what's really fun with Andrea is that she would be really great for it, because she was the one I worked with in the past. And she's just incredibly passionate about green infrastructure and seeing it come to life, and has had a lot of experience implementing these systems across campus, and is probably one of the most animated and engaging people on the topic. And that's contagious to be around. So I think that she's also a person well suited for this.
Nice. Thank you. Ian, we're getting close to our 4:15 ending time. So
Sure.
Let me ask you one more, sort of to hit this from the student perspective a little bit. So obviously students can be undergrads and participate in things like the Rainworks Challenge. Do you recommend that students who are interested in this, should they go ahead and pursue something like a graduate degree? And then if so, do they need to go the route that you did with landscape architecture, or is there another route that they could look into as well?
I think first and foremost, it's important to explore. And of course, this is just from my own personal experience. I don't know if there's, again, one solution, but I really benefited from not rushing into anything particular and actually trying all the different fields that piqued my curiosity. And this really helped to establish what I in fact liked. I wanted to be a waiter, so I worked at a French restaurant, and it was brutal. And I'm not interested in being a waiter anymore. And I worked as a data analyst in automotive racing, and really enjoyed traveling the country and going to NASCAR and IndyCar events. And that was a lot of fun, but it wasn't the culture I wanted to be part of, because I wanted to, again, operate in this vein of sustainability, and that just wasn't the place to have the conversation. And I recognize that. And, you know, I was fascinated by science. So I went into really hardcore molecular biology and genomics, and realized what I loved from it, but also what it took to be successful in that field that didn't interest me. And through all of that, I was very fortunate to be able to kind of carve out this niche and figure out how to apply it. So I think for those who want to move forward as students and really do something that they can get behind and enjoy, it would be to just kind of apply for those opportunities and try them out and vet it. And if you are in fact interested, grad school for landscape architecture and urban design and architecture, they're all professional degrees. The master's program is kind of the terminus classically for those fields, and is more than sufficient to get jobs at the best firms in the world. And so, you know, some people will get PhDs, but they often tend to be in the more academic vein, or for outcomes like the national labs, where it's kind of this balance between academia and industry.
Nice. All right, well, let me pause again and see what other questions folks have for you right now.
If nobody's got anything, I'll just ask a question.
Hello, Michael.
Hey, so I live out in San Jose, actually. That's where I am right now. And I was just curious if you want to share, like, maybe what your favorite project you worked on is, like anything around here or maybe somewhere around the world, or.
Yeah, it was tough. I was kind of thinking about it recently. I have a bittersweet memory of projects because I really love getting into them, but then by the time you're done, you're just like kind of over it. So actually, the few projects that really come to mind have all taken place in San Jose. And so one was my master's thesis, which became a 3-year research associate study with UC Berkeley and other institutions looking at urban heat islands in San Jose at McLaughlin and another cross street. It's like a midtown business district. And we were studying it and bridging data between different platforms and really trying to come up with cool new methods that would be relevant to industry, like get it out of the publications of academia and put it into the hands of those who can use it for future projects. So I really enjoyed that because it was one of the few times I could sit and meditate and dig deep and step away and come back. And that process was so valuable because it was almost like getting another degree without like the structure and the formality and actually having to pay for it. But I really enjoyed that and helped me become really familiar with San Jose, which is a huge boost because now I have so many projects in San Jose and I can speak to this experience that no one else really can offer. And that's quite powerful. And what we're working on now, that patch network of different developments that are a mix between office and retail and residential, is in downtown San Jose. And it's about how do we tap into the recycled water network? How do we benefit ecology along the Guadalupe River? How do we address concerns about homelessness and water quality while be considerate of environmental justice and equity? And how do we do this in a fashion that's conducive with the character that the city actually wants to have? Downtown San Jose, even though it's next to Silicon Valley, is kind of a sleepy downtown. And I think that there's a lot of rich potential to revive the city and to have people value the downtown and re-inhabit it after COVID. And so, you know, these are some of the fun projects, and there's so much growth happening there. There's so much money getting pumped into that environment. We got to like step in and kind of guide the conversation so that the outcome is like really something that we'll value and cherish. And it's not just another city that kind of screwed up, made some bad decisions and looked back and was like, oh shit, well, we had done it differently. You know, might have valued our riverfront. We might have valued the last remaining park system that was like winding itself through the city. And so I think those are the ones that resonate with me most. I am working on that project now. I've probably been working maybe too many hours this week, but it is also something that is most certainly going to bare data and valuable insight that carries on to future projects.
Nice. That's awesome. I'm looking forward to experiencing it.
Yeah. Yeah. It might be a couple years, but we're working on it.
Sure. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Thank you, Michael. Let's see if we got anybody else that wants to chime in real quick before we let Ian go. And quiet group today.
I have another question.
Sure.
If that's okay. I'm a third year in the architecture program and thinking about doing the landscape program. And so I guess a question that I have is, how do you, it's so easy to feel like burnt out when you spend so many hours on a project and kind of feel like defeated. How do you hold on to the big things that are like really big challenges that you're trying to face through your work? Like, how do you hold on through those things, through the frustrations and the many late nights?
There's a couple answers to that. One is school's brutal.
Yeah.
And what you're experiencing is like probably one of the more extremes. And so I've kind of come out of grad school a little bit bruised and battered, but am stronger for it. And the teacher who beat me up the most is the one I value the most, because the rigor he instilled in me. I know this is so weird in hindsight, but like, trust me, like the rigor he instilled in me, like makes me so effective in the workplace compared to others who haven't had to go through that, that like I see like much more beautiful and powerful outcomes in my work because I know that iteration is essential.
Mm-hmm.
There's that. It's important to find a company that has the right workplace culture. Some respect your work-life balance and others are abusive. And I think that classically it's an assumption that all of them are kind of like work farms, but it's not the case. And you can definitely find ones that will respect you and enable you to draw a line so that you can have a life outside of it. And that's really the last thing is like, if you don't draw the line, they will forever be coming to you with more requests.
Yeah.
And it's just the very nature of any workplace environment. And so it's, you know, once you feel like you're pretty comfortable at your job and you have good job security, it's important to be able to push back and to take care of yourself, because working is a long distance race.
Mm-hmm.
And of course there's small sprints, but it's what enables you to continue to enjoy it. And that's, again, what's most important. But you got one more year, you're doing great, and here when you're done, I promise.
Thank you.
And for those of you who are not in the landscape architecture program, but thinking about grad school, that's not necessarily an unfamiliar thought working on even a master's degree or a PhD in another program like geography. There are plenty of people I know who, when they finish their master's degree, they're not really interested in that topic anymore because they feel like that's been a part of their life for nonstop for 2, maybe 4 years. And so that's not an unfamiliar, uncommon feeling.
Yeah. I mean, a master's in some ways, I mean, more formalized, but like undergrad is an exploration process, and you kind of figure out as you mature at that stage what it is you're most interested in, what you want to get out of it. And so I still have a foot in the landscape architecture realm, and I'm very grateful for it having opened this door to me, or this realization. So you don't need to be married to what you go to grad school for. So it really is like, pick an institution where you know someone there that's doing exactly what you want to do. And there's so many schools out there, and right now is definitely going to be a challenging time, and not a bad time to stay in school, even though it's like online. If the job market's tough, one way to be competitive is to show that you have continued to make an effort to grow yourself personally and professionally, and that you're not really, you're always kind of a motivated individual. And that's the thing that will shine through more than anything else.
And the other thing you all have going for you right now, and we'll let Ian go, is that as students, you can really leverage the fact that you are a student to get access to people, organizations that you don't normally get access to. Because if you're working on something for a class project or a research project, if you're interested in a particular career, people are very happy typically to talk to students about all the things you want to talk about. So while you have that opportunity, leverage that, meet those people that you're interested in, reach out to them. I mean, they're going to want you to be successful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's like probably one of the best pieces of advice that I wish I got early on is, as a student with a university at your back, a lot of people are receptive to you. And if you go to companies and you pursue individuals through LinkedIn from the standpoint of, I'm just interested in this field and I would love to talk to you about you, people love talking about themselves. So it's really a great way to sit down and start meeting different people. You'll get a higher response rate than like sending out letters saying, please can I have a job? But the hardest part, and this is like the most cliche thing you'll ever hear, is like the hardest part is getting in the room with that person, but it's so true. But once you're sitting down with them and you have a great conversation, I think 1 out of every 3 times I did an informational interview became a job interview. It's like it became an internship or it became something else. So it's much more powerful, especially in this day and age of application overload from whatever forum in which they're broadcasting jobs. It's very hard to stand out from the stack. And this will become increasingly true as like we become more and more reliant on this as the means by which we hire people, which I think we're already there. So send them a personal message on LinkedIn, call them. Like I remember in Tennessee, I was looking for a job and I was able to drum up a job that didn't even exist because I called the vice president. And it was a total Hail Mary, but I also took a chance. And it was a fun experience. I didn't take the job, but why not? It's good practice.
If y'all are interested in a more formalized way to think about what Ian's talking about, there's a book by a guy named Don Asher. I don't remember the exact name, but it's got like Cracking the Hidden Job Market. I actually just finished it as part of the MBA program that I'm working on. And it's a very concise, well-structured way to apply the things that Ian's talking about to meet people so that you can get in front of those 1,000 other people that are applying for the same job.
Yeah. One last thing, and maybe it's just because I'm like a little bit OCD that it happened to go through this route. I find myself today being a pretty proficient writer, and that largely stemmed from me spending so much time drafting emails to write to companies for those informational interviews and those internships. It was like a really intensive 2-year process of like second guessing every single word I wrote, because like a text message, there's no subtlety or expression. So you have to be very clear on your word usage, on simplicity, on really just getting to the point. And so practice writing those emails, really spend some time, sit on it for a day, because man, so many emails I've sent out and like looked at 30 seconds later and just like, oh God, why didn't I look again? So take your time, and it's really cool to see how that will benefit you in so many ways.
Ian, man, thanks for hanging out. I really appreciate you being here, and I really am enjoying this too, because we've got a much more diverse group of folks from an academic standpoint who are here hanging out with us today. So I'm really glad that the sustainability folks, the landscape architecture folks are all hanging out with us today.
Yeah.
So if anyone wants to stick around, if you've got questions or comments for me, I'm happy to hang out for a little bit. Otherwise, I just want to let you all know that next week's guest is a guy named Trent Hare. He is a cartographer with the USGS, except he works in their astrophysics group. So all the cartography he does is all for the moon and Mars and all that sort of stuff. He's had his work featured on the cover of the Esri map book. He's been featured 4 different times in the map book. So he's a really, really skilled cartographer who has no background in geography whatsoever. His background is in computer science and math. So anyway, if you're interested in learning more about cartography and sort of his design process, be sure to join us next week as well. And with that, Ian, thanks a lot, man. And tell Jerry we said hello.
I will. It's good seeing you.
You too, man.
Yeah, I'll be in Tennessee when things calm down. Fingers crossed.
Sounds good. We'll hang out with you and Jay then.
Absolutely. Take care. Stay safe,
Thanks.
everyone.